Yud Beis and Mud Beis, 12b towards the bottom. We are coming to the conclusion of our narrative with regard to the slavery in Egypt, at least the beginning stages. All of this started because the Mishnah said of the law of the Sotah that there's an element of measure for measure. And the Mishnah compared it to various different figures in history who also were rewarded in the positive measure for measure. And one is Miriam, because Miriam waited for her brother Moshe as he was in the Nile. So later in her life, when she was afflicted with saras, skin discoloration as a result of spiritual defects, for lack of a better term. Sorry. So the whole people waited for 7 days. And this is because she waited for Moshe Rabbeinu just for an hour. She waited until Batya picked them up. So the Gemara went on to describe and comment on the detailed narrative of that event, beginning with how the slavery evolved, basically the first chapter of Exodus. And now the Gemara went into the second chapter of Exodus, the beginning of the second chapter, which describes this event of Moshe Rabbeinu, of the decree to kill the babies, why the decree was made, and then Moshe Rabbeinu found it floating in the Nile. And now we're getting to the point where Batya, as we discussed already, Batya found him. And we discussed yesterday how Moshe Rabbeinu did not want to nurse from any of the women, the Egyptian women, because he wouldn't, a mouth that's going to talk to God and instruct Torah, inappropriate that it suckles from non-kosher milk. And now we come to the final part of the narrative, which is Miriam's, which is what we've been waiting for the whole time, which is Miriam waiting for him. We're coming back to that point. That's why we went through this whole exercise, right? We're coming to the point of understanding the part of the story where Miriam waits for Moshe Rabbeinu, her involvement in saving him, which, as measure for measure, the Jewish people waited for her many years later. So we're coming to this final part of the narrative, and then the Gemara is going to go on to the next measure for measure, and the positive, which was Yosef HaTzadik.
Didn't Moshe have a speech impediment?
That came later, yeah. His speech impediment came later.
He was nursing a bit from the non-Jewish.
I don't remember that.
That was the test they did.
Yeah, with the coal. He touched the hot coal and burnt his lip.
Oh, I thought it was from the milk of a non-Jewish woman.
I don't remember reading anything.
I heard that.
If you find this source, I'd like to see it. I don't remember reading
I don't know where a long time ago, but I remember something.
If you find it, I'd love to see it. Yeah, he touched hot coal. Right, that was later in his life. That was already when he's in Pharaoh's house. Anyway, so this is why we're concluding with this part of the story, because we went through this whole exercise just to demonstrate Miriam's waiting for her brother, which is why she was rewarded later when the people waited for her measure for measure. And then once we get to that part of the story, which is basically what we're going to do today, next week we're going to get to the story of Yosef, who's also someone who's rewarded measure for measure, right? He sanctified God's name, and then he was later rewarded. He took care of his, right? He took care of his father's burial. His burial is taken care of. So we're going to get into that next week. So we're really coming to the home stretch of this discussion on the narrative of Moshe Rabbeinu being saved, the beginning of the enslavement, the decree against the Jewish babies, and then Moshe Rabbeinu being saved, and Miriam waiting for him.
But with Miriam, when they all waited for Miriam, it's also because she was the leader at that point. She was the leader of all women.
Yeah, she was. She was. Right. So that itself is a reward for her waiting at the beginning. So this is where we are right now. Yeah. Even though we learned that she wasn't so good looking, and she married a guy Kalev who revealed her beauty. So it's quite an interesting. She's quite the character. Okay. So we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the bottom of the page on your base and with base 12b. So the daughter of Pharaoh told her, "Lechi, go," etc. Right. So well, let's look at the actual verses. I have the text over here. So, right, the daughter of Pharaoh said, she opened up the basket. She sees the baby crying. She has compassion, and she notices, because of the circumcision, that this must be a Hebrew baby. And So Miriam's there and she interjects and says, would you like me to go bring a Hebrew woman to nurse him because he's not nursing from the Egyptians? That was verse 7. Verse 8 says, the daughter of Pharaoh, Batya, tells her, Miriam, not knowing that this is actually his sister, please go. And then this is the verse, and the young girl went and called the mother of the child without disclosing that this is the mother of the child. And then the next verse reads, and the daughter of Pharaoh said, take this child. She says this to Yocheved, to the mother, who is now brought by Miriam. Take this child, please nurse her for me, and I will pay you for your time. And the woman took her and nursed him. And the verse goes on to say that she was raised, that Moshe was raised by Pharaoh, and so on and so forth. But we're going to end our discussion of the narrative at this verse, verse 9 in chapter 2, which concludes with, so we're going to analyze 2 verses today. Number 1, 3 verses. Number 1, no, sorry, 2. Number 1, Pharaoh telling Miriam, yes, please go get a Jewish wet nurse. That's verse 8. That's the first verse we're going to analyze. And then the next verse we're going to analyze, which is verse 9, is Pharaoh saying to Yocheved, to the mother, please take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay you.
That's great.
This is where we are. That's exactly the point. The Gemara is going to make comment about that. Okay, so the first verse there, verse 8, says, the daughter of Pharaoh tells Miriam, go ahead, you offered to call a Jewish wet nurse, please go call her. Amr Belezer says, Melamed, this teaches us, Shaholcha bezrizus, she went with alacrity, she went with enthusiasm, she went quickly, Ka'alma, like a young maiden. Right, the verse says, Batela Ka'alma, and the young woman went and called the mother. Now she's really a young child. So it doesn't say Batela Chayalda, and the child went. It says Batela Ka'alma, the young woman went, indicating to us that she went with all the enthusiasm and vigor of a young woman, rather than a little child who wanders off, gets distracted, and like children do. She did it like with a sense of maturity, but not like an old woman who can't walk, but a young, strong woman who's excited and ran off to get what she had to get done. So this is a Lezer's comment on this word Alma in describing Miriam. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, the word Ha'alma, which means a young woman, can also mean to hide. Helem is hidden. Lalem, to conceal. So what did she hide? Shalima Dvara. She concealed her true identity. She concealed her word. She didn't say that she was a sister, and she didn't say she was going to call the mother. She just happened to be a passerby, and she sees this event, and she's a Jewish girl, and she goes to the daughter of Pharaoh, and the celebrity, and says, "Oh, I can help you. I'll go get a Jewish wet nurse," without saying she's a sister, without saying she's calling the mother. So not only is she a prophetess, which we already discussed, and we're going to discuss more her prophecy. Not only is she mature, knowing to watch her brother, not only does she have all the vigor of a young woman, but she's also clever.
How did Pharaoh himself
Except
that his daughter is taking in a Jewish kid?
Oh, we're adopting him. Who cares? He will raise a nice Egyptian. That's what they thought. They figured they'll raise a nice Egyptian. Until it didn't work out for them. But I assume that's what they thought. They thought they will just raise a nice nice Egyptian boy. Right? And for all intended and purposes, until Moshe Rabbeinu ran away, he probably lived like an Egyptian.
Yeah.
He did, like. Anyway. So the next verse, verse 9 reads, the daughter of Pharaoh tells Yocheved, right? Miriam runs to call this Jewish wet nurse, which is Moshe Rabbeinu's mother, her mother, Yocheved. So the daughter of Pharaoh, Batya, tells her this, what she thinks is a wet nurse, but really is the mother. The daughter of Pharaoh says, "Hey, take this child, Hazeh, this child, please nurse him, and I will pay you." Now, this word helichi, which means take, right, can also be divided into two, and therefore comments the Gemara. Amar Rab Chama bar Chanina, Chama son of Chanina says, Misnava, she, Batya, prophesies. Then he does ma misnava. She didn't even realize she was prophesying, because in the word helichi, you can divide it into two. Hey lechi, here is yours. It's supposed to helichi, take. Helichi can be translated ha shalachi, here is yours. So she was prophesying. She was identifying something she didn't know about. she was indicating that this actually belonged, that this is the mother, not even realizing that it's the mother. Saying, hey, Lechi, take this belongs to you. Sorry?
Just quickly.
Yeah.
It's interesting that Bashir wanted to pay the Hebrew maid servant. I mean, since her father wanted to kill Jews and destroy them, but yet the daughter was very happy with them in good terms.
So obviously she is already compassionate. We already learned, and she already has empathy for the Jewish people. We already learned earlier that she was at the river bathing as a sort of purity, getting rid of her attachment to her father's idol worship.
Right.
So obviously she was a kind of rebel in the family, right?
Yeah, in a good way.
No, in a good, yeah.
In a good sense. Yeah.
And rebelling against evil is a fantastic thing, right?
Something special about her.
Not yet.
Did she leave Egypt when they all left?
Good question. I don't know. I don't know if she left Egypt when the Jews left. I don't know. Good question.
She must have been very attached to that boy.
Yes, I mean, I wonder as an adopted mother, if she was proud. It seems she was proud of her son. Look at her son's freeing these slaves. She obviously felt compassion for them,
She didn't idol worship.
and she abandoned idol worship. But remember, when Moshe Rabbeinu leads the Jewish people out of Egypt, he's 80 years old. He runs away from home when he's 20, I believe, or somewhere near there. So that's 60 years he's gone from his adopted mother. So what their relationship is like during those years, I have no idea, if any. Number one. Number two, is she even alive when Moshe Rabbeinu comes back and he's 80 years old? How old is she? I have no idea. So I don't even know if she was alive at the time. I'm not sure. Sorry? At least 100, right? Because she's at least 20 years old when she's adopted. Let's just assume, I don't say at least. Let's just assume she's 20 years old. Even if she's 10 years old, which would be young. Even if she's 10, she's 90. Right? Now, as for the wet nurse, it was very common, even until about 100 years ago, or maybe even until today, that royalty did not nurse. Royalty didn't nurse. It was seen as like a barbaric and what's the word, like something that only a lowly person would do. Undignified. So royals would always hire wet nurses. That's where the term wet nurse comes from. It's quite common. I don't even think just royals. I think even high society in general. Probably about 100 years ago, until they started realizing that there's a natural attachment that's developed and it's healthy for the child in terms of their relationship with their mother that they nurse. But I think it was pretty common that people would hire wet nurses, especially if you're highborn. So even if Pharaoh gave birth to him, she would hire a wet nurse anyway, right? And okay, the Egyptians aren't working, so let's hire a Jewish one. What's the difference? We're paying them anyway. It's like it's just a plebeian low life type thing to do to nurse a baby. That's kind of that's the royal attitude toward it, I imagine.
I wonder if Hashem had Rosh notice on her with all those plagues, if she was affected also.
Right. So again, was she even alive?
Yeah.
And if she was alive, what was her relationship at the time? I don't know. I really don't know. I'd love to see sources. If someone watching knows sources on what happens to Batya later on in Moshe Rabbeinu's life, would be interesting to hear.
Maybe some midrash story.
Yeah, it's possible there's some midrashic on. I don't know. You know, you can look in the Ma'am Loyas, which we have in English, the Torah anthology. You know what I'm talking about? We have that set in the library called the Torah anthology. It's a translation of the Ma'am Loyas. Ma'am Loyas is a kind of narrative created by the yes. Oh, it's 10, 15 volumes in the library. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's like a light. Yeah, it's like a yellowish. So white with a yellowish tinge. It's called Torah anthology. It's a translation of Ma'am Loyas. Ma'am Loyas is written by a scholar within the last century. I believe he lived in Jerusalem, and he basically took all the midrashic sources and turned it into a narrative that follows along the Torah. So you can read it as almost like a storybook. And Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, like the more recent Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, author of Jewish meditation, so he also translated that entire work, Ma'am Loyas, into English, called the Torah anthology. Very recommended. So if there was midrashic sources on where Batya was, I would imagine it'd be in there. So that would be a good place to start. I don't know. It's in English. So I don't know. You can translate. But look at the Torah anthology on these verses in Shmois. Just take what you do is just take your Torah anthology.
It's by book.
It's by book. So take the Jewish anthology on Exodus. Open up chapter 1, 2, which describes the story, and I'm sure it'll be, if it exists, it would probably be there.
Well, Midrash says they have something.
Yeah, they might have.
Although
Yeah.
it's more condensed.
Yeah. The Torah anthology would definitely cover it if it's there.
Yeah, it's more
I think.
comprehensive.
Okay, so the verse continues. Batya says to Yocheved, I will give your scharch, I will give your wages. I'll pay you for your time for nursing my adopted son. So comments the Gemara, Rabbi Chanina says, Loi dayan. It's not enough. The tzaddikim. It's not only that the righteous, that they are given back their lost object, right? This baby rightfully belongs, is rightfully to be with Yocheved. So like her lost object, her lost son, her lost item is being returned to her. So that itself is reward, right? In theory, the very fact that her son survives and the very fact that she gets to nurse him is itself a miracle. But not only that, says the Gemara, but she actually gets reward. She gets paid for taking back that which is rightfully hers. Quite remarkable. Now, at this point, the Gemara makes the final comment
And the whole reason
on this narrative.
Based on Pharaoh's decree, how ironic that it's his own daughter that makes
That's right.
the reward.
That's correct. That's correct. Found it?
Amazon has about 10 books on the life of Pharaoh's daughter.
Yeah, I wonder how many. I wonder how much is novel. I wonder how much is nonfiction, or how much is fiction. Anyway, so now the Gemara makes the final comment on Miriam in this whole episode. So it quotes the verse later. It quotes the verse at the splitting of the sea, when the sea split, and that afterwards the Jewish people sing Az Yasher. The Jewish people sing the famous song, which we sing every day before Yishtabach. Every day we say it in our prayers, Az Yasher. And there the verse says that Miriam led the women in playing with tambourines, right? Which is itself an amazing thing. Why do they even have tambourines?
When they packed up so quickly, how did they move to the race?
So the Rebbe comments that the Jewish women, even while in exile, had their tambourines anticipating the celebration. This is their priorities. While they're in exile, they're making sure their husbands are giving birth, we learned before, making sure they're raising children and they're under these dire circumstances. They also have tambourines ready. So at the moment redemption comes, because they're confident that will, they can sing and dance for Hashem. It's an incredible, beautiful thing. Like that, living in exile with the redemption. And they've pushed that we've, at least, I don't know if they would actually say we should have tambourines waiting in our house, but the idea that even while we're in exile, we live with the confidence that redemption is coming. So they had tambourines. So the Gemara, the verse there says, Miriam, and this is how it describes Miriam. And Miriam, the prophetess, sister of Aaron, took the tambourine and danced and played with the women. So she's described as a prophetess, sister of Aaron. Why not sister of Moshe Rabbeinu? We're talking about now the splitting of the sea. Moshe Rabbeinu is the hero here. He just split the sea. And yet we describe Miriam as the prophetess,
Talking about Moshe.
sister of Aaron, not sister. Yeah. So why? Exactly. We're talking about Moshe the whole time. So why wouldn't the verse say, and Miriam, the prophetess, sister of Moshe, took the tambourine? Or Moshe and Aaron. But it says here, the prophetess, sister of Aaron. So comments the Gemara. Achas Aaron, v'lei achas Moshe. Sister of Aaron and not sister of Moshe. Why is the verse leaving that out? This seems to be the higher praise of her, that she's sister of Moshe Rabbeinu. Especially since she just, as you just noted, she spent all time saving Moshe Rabbeinu. So Amr of Amram therefore comments. This is a rabbi of the Gemara's age named Amram, who happens to have the same name as the father of Miriam, Amram. Yeah, but Amr of Amram says, I guess he's named after her. Amar Rav, the name of Rav. But Amrila, others say it wasn't Rav Amram, the name of Rav, but rather Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav. It was Rav Nachman who related the name of Rav. Either way, Rav is speaking, either Rav Amram relates it or Rav Nachman relates it. And he taught. Shoyis Misnava, she would prophesize, Kishi Achais Aaron, even whilst she was only the sister of Aaron before Moshe was born. That's what the verse is trying to indicate. That her being a prophetess is not because her brother was selected leadership and therefore by extension, kind of nepotism, she also got some prophecy. No. She's got prophecy on her own right. And therefore, even before Moshe was born, while she was still only the sister of Aaron, even then, she was prophesying. What was the prophecy she was prophesying? So it continues the Gemara on top of your Gimel Amud Aleph 13a. So, Vaimera, she would say, Asida imi, she would go around prophesizing. My mother will eventually, Shetele Bain, give birth to a son, Shemai sister that will redeem the Jewish people. The Kimich of Moshe, at the moment Moshe was born, and the Smala Kolabayis Kula Oiv, and the entire home was filled with light, as we learned earlier. Right? We learned earlier that we commented on the verse which says that when the baby was born, they saw Kitoiv that it was good, and with different opinions as to what it means, they saw it was good, and one of them was that the house is filled with light. So they see a baby's born, house is filled with light. So Amad Avia, her father, Amram, gets up. The Nashgal Roshan gave his daughter a kiss on the forehead. And Amrullah, he tells his daughter, Biti, my dear daughter, your prophecy is being fulfilled. You prophesied that we would give birth to a son that would redeem the Jewish people. This baby who's light, spiritual, radiance, is filling the home. This has to be the one you're talking about. So even 80 years before it actually happens, the father has the confidence just by looking at the baby that this is it. So he kisses his daughter on the forehead and says, your prophecy is here. But then, once the baby was put into the basket, floating in the Nile, Amadavia, the father got up, Amram, the Tafchal Resha, and he tapped her, banged her on the head. Amarla, and he tells his daughter, Biti, my dear daughter, where's your prophecy? Where's your prophecy? The baby which we all had open is now floating in the Nile. What's going to happen? Right? It almost seems like, this gets back to the idea of the Jewish women who were preparing their tambourines with faith that it was going to come, that God would redeem them. Yocheved and Miriam both had faith that this would be okay, which is why they put the baby in the Nile. Amram was a little more skeptical. He's like, a baby floating in the Nile is going to be okay? How exactly do you plan on feeding this baby? How exactly do you plan on stopping the baby, the basket from not flipping over and the baby drowning? What if it rains? What if there's I don't know if there's alligators or hang out in those areas, but I don't know. What if there's some other animal? This is your strategy? Put a baby in a basket and let it float? Amram's like, this is done. But Miriam and Yocheved had faith. Like Jewish women who always had faith. This gets back to what we talked about earlier. The women had faith, and therefore they coaxed their husband to have children, even in dire straits of exile. They raised their children even in exile. The Jewish midwives having self-sacrificed to raise Jewish children. We have this thread here of Jewish women's faith in divine redemption and doing whatever is necessary to keep that going. But divine providence, this is all in the law of Sotah, which is about an unfaithful woman, or more precisely, a husband who's jealous of an unfaithful woman. But in reality, as is often the case, the Sotah reveals the righteousness of the woman. Right? That's what the Sotah informs. When she drinks the water, it informs us one way or the other. So it's as much positive as it is negative. And here we have a whole narrative of the beauty of Jewish women, concluding with this ode to their faith in Hashem and His salvation. Even the depth of exile, forging ahead, raising children, doing whatever it takes to save the children, having tambourines ready to play, to thank Hashem, and full of prophecy. Even as Amram turns to her and says, what's with your prophecy? This baby floating in the Nile. And this then is the meaning of the verse, which says, and the sister of Moshe stood from far, to know what's going to happen with Moshe. When Moshe is floating in the Nile, Miriam was standing on the side watching. What was she watching to know? Not just to know what's going to happen to him. But she wanted to know what's going to be the end of her prophecy. She was confident in her prophecy, even as the baby was floating in the Nile. She just wanted to stand there and watch to see what's going on. And this is where the Gemara concludes its narrative here. And this is when she waited, and later she was rewarded. The people waited for her. All comes down to this.
How old was she at that time?
How old was Miriam at this time? She couldn't have been too old. I don't know. Married? No, I don't think she's married yet. No way.
No.
Well, you said she was a child that acted like a...
Yeah, she was a child that acted like a young woman, so she must have been a child. How young? I'm not sure.
10.
Something like that. Because the Gemara comments on the fact that she's referred to as Alma.
Not a woman yet, right?
She's not a woman yet. That's
Less than 12.
yeah. So presumably less than 12. Yeah, she's
I
presumably.
understand the father saying, you tell me I'm going to have a child that's going to lead the Jews out of Israel, out of Egypt,
Mhm.
and now you put him in the Nile, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I would put my foot down,
Oh yeah.
leave it to a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old.
She had, Yocheved was also in on it, right? Yocheved put the canopy. We said she put a canopy on top of the baby. She wasn't, but she also was a little bit doubtful, right? She put the canopy because she said, "I might never see him get married,"
That's right.
right? Well, actually, no. Maybe she was confident that he would live to wedding, but she wasn't confident she would see the wedding. But Miriam is clearly much more confident. She's standing there and she wants to observe, and indeed, her being there is what brings the mother back to nurse him. Actually, she's really the heroine in this whole story. And then here the Gemara concludes this narrative. So we're going to stop over here. And on Monday, we begin a new narrative, backing up to the other measure for measure, which is the story of Yosef. Yosef went to organize the whole procession to bury his father with dignity. Even though he died in Egypt, he had a whole procession to take him back to Israel. So he himself merited that Moshe Rabbeinu was responsible for burying him, taking his bones from Egypt, carrying them all the way through the desert for 40 years to bring them to Israel. And this is another measure from measure mentioned in the Gemara. So we're going to get into that narrative as well. And a lot also about the that whole era of the Jews in the desert. We're going to get into that, God willing. Yeah, what were you saying?
Why was Goshen spared from that part of Egypt? Like Goshen is still like the plagues didn't affect Goshen, well, some of them at least. And
The land of Goshen was originally designated during Yosef's era for his family. And it seems that the tribe of Levi decided to stay there, stay in their own bubble of Torah learning and not integrate in Egyptian society. Which others decided to, and that's when the slavery.
It's also prime land.
Goshen was prime because it was prime. It's right on the Nile. So look at the map to get a better visual. But the Nile essentially flows north into the Mediterranean, from the Red Sea into the Mediterranean. And as it goes through Egypt, it has these veins that go out.
right.
Like there's a central line, and then the water comes out. And that was their irrigation system. And Goshen was right in that fertile land. And that's what made Egypt as a powerhouse anyway, because they sold grain to all over the Mediterranean basin.
Right.
We were on a boat, it took us from Cairo to the Aswan Dam, all the way along the Nile.
Yeah, it's supposed to be very beautiful.
The Nile is not so beautiful.
No, it's not.
No,
It's filthy.
Oh, really? I thought it was a beautiful river. Yeah, okay.
it still operates today. It's not dried up.
The Nile, why would it be dried up?
I don't know. I thought it was like a biblical thing.
So biblical things don't exist today. Israel's a biblical thing. It's still around.
Yeah, no, but like,
River's a river.
yeah.
St.
Okay.
Louis River was in biblical times too, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
All right, Eden, have a wonderful day and a good Erev Shabbos.
Yeah.